The idea is that Satan is necessary to try to mislead human beings, is necessary as a counterforce to Christianity, the counterforce to God, because it is by giving opposition to Satan that human beings grow. If there were no challenge, if religion were just like receiving chocolate and eating it, that's a human fantasy. This would never be Christianity. So a negative force is needed to accomplish the will of God.
Day by day we are confronted by the monotony of life. The modern secular myth pushes us into an ever disenchanted world. Even the spiritual philosophies of our times seem to surrender to this wave of materialist thought forms that sprung out of the seeds of modernity. Life seems dull, pointless, as there is no major metaphysical challenge, no hero's journey to be undertaken, and everything that we achieve will be buried in the grave with us or be forgotten with the passing of history. No superficial atheist construct that tries to comfort us in the face of the inevitability of death can resolve our sadness that the thought of the total annihilation of our being produces in us. No conception of our corpses serving as nutrition for plants can truly console us. Is this really the end goal of life? Is this what our whole experience is about? Is this chain of being, this cycle of birth and death, of life feeding on life, representative of our true purpose? Our mind and soul are not satisfied by such a view. Secularism has made our lives cosmically less interesting. Political narratives have taken the place of religious mythologies and theologies. There is evil in this world, but it's totally human. The metaphysical dimension of evil has been entirely lost. Human all too human. Nietzsche's impulse to set aside the Platonic ontological dualism and to be completely embodied in matter without any hope for an afterlife has been achieved within the project of modernity. God is no more. Religion is revived only as a useful metaphor that might contain evolutionary advantageous memes, but its ontological dimension is disregarded. A materialist society has the advantage that it explores and discovers every corner of the physical world through the application of its science. It enjoys life as it is presented to the senses. It only accepts the sensible empirical data, while ignoring any other strange glitch that might contradict the ultimate materialist assumption that there is only matter, that spiritual realities are phantasmagorical creations of the limited and fearful mind of the people who cannot deal with the imminent reality of death. That's why they invent religion. That's why they create God, heaven, and hell, only to cope with non-existence. Nietzsche's idea of a man who can create his own values has seen fertile soil for its flourishing within the context of modernity and postmodernity. Yet instead of the Übermensch, what we saw developing ever more often are two aspects of the same coin: hedonism and nihilism. The lustful giving in to the pleasures of the body, the addictive abuse of substances and everything that can fill the void of nihilism. Being nihilistic by choice, which is what moderns often are, is like being a cell in an organism and denying any higher order and higher purpose within that organism that transcends the limits of the individual cell and of the small collective which is within its direct proximity. Being nihilistic means lacking a higher purpose because there's no metaphysical framework that can allow such a life mission to be embraced. It is clear that this condition comes from an absence of spiritual insight, and one must not think of it as a mere coincidence. Actually, things happen because there is a will or more at play. This condition afflicts us by design, not by chance. And who is to blame for it? It's easy to find a scapegoat, but going beyond the surface level analysis, We can infer logically that every affliction is allowed by the higher powers. Every evil is possible because God allows it. But why? To answer this question, let's go back to the picture of the modern man that we described before. He is spiritually blind. He believes that everything is matter. He believes he is just the physical body, and that in the greater scheme of things, his actions don't truly matter, because his imminent death will erase everything. He enjoys life till it becomes dull, and he runs out of serotonin and dopamine. There's no great metaphysical battle that he has to fight, no great evil out there or inward to overcome, just him with his simple life and simple things. Paraphrasing Baudelaire, the greatest trick that the devil pulled was to convince everyone that he doesn't exist. We go on with our lives falling for this exact trick, and those who deny the presence of evil itself in the world are the ones who fall the deepest. The modern world is built upon this illusion, which has made us utterly materialistic in our thinking and interpretation of our perceptions. This is how the devil hides. This is how he wins the game. Because yes, there is a game going on. How can anything exist without an opposition to determine what that thing is? Ultimate unity results in nothingness, a state in which we participate in deep sleep, yet on the level of evolving entities, life is divided into opposites and polarities. If there's no opposition to the ultimate good, then there's a complete absence of dynamism and evolution. If there's no up and down, better and worse, no hierarchy, then there's no growth towards the realization of an ideal within the confines of contingency. There's no God and there's no Satan. The project of postmodernity, pushing the boundaries of modernity even further, tried to attack this very hierarchical essence of reality. And when you attack the truth and the structure of the world itself, you are functioning as a conduit for the great trick to take a stronger grip on society as a whole. The ideal of equality is not wrong per se, but instead of having a metaphysical ground on which it can be understood as unity with the divine, it is reduced to a sociological issue, which relates to material and psychological conditions. It would not be wrong if we would call these inclinations Promethean or Luciferic, as Prometheus himself has been co-opted as a symbol for the rise of science and of modern ethics, and he represents the challenging and subversion of the divine will. But we are not dealing just with a symbol here, though even symbols are real in some sense, maybe more than what we consider normally to be real. Some special clairvoyant people like Rudolf Steiner were quite aware of this fact, and we will see this in the following quote, where he talks about the German novelist Ricarda Huch and her sense of what is going on. Quote, "Instinct, I have said, makes some people realize that something is necessary. One such individual is Ricarda Huch. Her latest work, on Luther's faith, is remarkable, not so much because of insight, but because of the instinct to be found in this book. If you read the first 3 chapters of the book, you find there a strange cry. I think we might call it such. A cry for humanity to find again what has really been lost since Luther came on the scene. Before his day, atavistic clairvoyance still existed. Ricarda Huch says that what humanity needs most of all today is to get to know the devil. She does not know, of course, why this is necessary, but she has an instinctive feeling that it is so. Hence her remarkable cry for knowledge of the devil in the first chapter of the book. This is highly symptomatic and significant for our time. Her thinking is, people will come to know God again once they know that the devil is all around them. Ricarda Huch does feel that people must get to know the devil as someone who is very real. But she immediately says, as a kind of apology, that one should not, of course, imagine the devil to be walking around in the street with horns and a tail. Oh, but he does walk around. They never know the devil is about, not even when he has them by the collar." End quote. If we accept this to be so, if we accept the possibility of the devil being real and all around us, even having quite a lot of control over us and our environment, life becomes immediately more terrifying. But if we flip the coin, it can suddenly become more exciting and interesting as we start to understand why this is allowed in the first place, why the world is structured as it is, and why we find ourselves in this situation. Christian theology has tried to come up with an answer to the problem of evil, and the Church officially recognizes St. Augustine's doctrine of Privatio boni as valid. The question, why does evil exist, is answered by saying that evil actually doesn't exist. It is only an absence of good, as a shadow is an absence of light. In this way, God isn't responsible for the presence of evil in the world, and his omnibenevolence can be preserved. Evil arises when Adam makes the wrong choice, and so humanity is to blame for all the trouble in the world, while its creator has nothing to do with it at all. This is a rather convenient way to deal with certain attacks on the Christian faith, which aim at destroying the idea that God is all good and that he made a perfect creation. The Privatio boni doctrine, from a certain perspective, clearly has some issues, and not only logical ones, but of coherence with Scripture. Before we get into that, we must switch to a broader issue which involves not only Christianity, but two different ways of looking at spirituality. The French traditionalist René Guénon wrote on the problem of evil in a way which strikes in accordance with the doctrine of Privatio boni. He metaphysically equates good with perfection and evil with imperfection. So if we look at the whole, it is perfect, which means that imperfection doesn't exist. But if we look at the parts of the whole, forgetting about its entirety, then we start to see imperfection. Therefore, what imperfection can be equated with is the relative, while perfection is the absolute. Thus, good is the absolute and evil is the relative. But the relative has no substance to it, it is illusory, it is only a limited perspective. Also, the relative is that which is impermanent, which ever changes, which is born and dies again and again, the samsara that the yogi has to evade. Thus we come to the first kind of spirituality of the two that we mentioned before without giving any detail. This view is a rejection of the world in its relative and imperfect form to embrace the absolute. Evil is just an illusion which creates dualism, and engaging with the relative means to be trapped within the confines of this illusion. In this sense, the doctrine of Privatio boni is validated and expanded upon, but with concepts that go beyond the scope of Christianity and which would be considered heretical. With this framework in mind, we could also understand symbolically why Adam is to blame for the evil in the world and not God himself. Because God, being whole and absolute, is without evil, but its parts, the relative and limited entities that inhabit the world, are subject to evil and its creators due to their entrapment in a relativist perspective. We won't find this explained like we just did within the official Christian doctrine, but we will find similarities only when we look at the writings of the mystics. This is the crucial difference between the first kind of spirituality, which coincides with the mystical view and path, which seeks unity with the divine through the renunciation of the world, and the second kind of spirituality, which doesn't want to abandon the world but wants to grow with it. Guénon is a representative of the first kind, though his usage of the word mystic doesn't coincide with how it was used before, as he is more of the opinion that mystics emphasized too much the sentimental side while not having any sort of official initiation in the mysteries. He is in line with Oriental philosophies and religions, particularly the ascetic tradition of yoga and Vedanta, of which adepts seek identity with Brahman and liberation from Maya. On the other side, Rudolf Steiner is a representative of the second kind of spirituality, which has the goal of developing certain powers and of discovering the hidden forces at play in the human being. Steiner himself writes in his autobiography that he didn't understand why mystics tried to empty their minds from thoughts instead of embracing them and making them flourish. The goal of spirituality along the ages has been to go beyond the ego, even to sacrifice it. But such a sacrifice to be of value requires a certain individual development. Otherwise, it's not a good sacrifice. Steiner and others such as Arthur M. Young stated this explicitly. Ken Wilber in his integral theory made a distinction between waking up, which is what Eastern traditions focus on more and which is promoted by the traditionalist school and by Guénon himself, and growing up, which is more of a Western moral and psychological trend. Western esotericism tends to blend the two together, with spiritual philosophers who focus more on the process within the world rather than on the techniques of liberation from contingency. It's this second perspective that necessitates more explicitly evil as a force which enables growth. If you don't encounter any obstacle on the path, then there isn't going to be any opportunity for you to overcome it and become stronger, more skillful, and resourceful through it. Like it or not, Satan enables all of this. People like to say that there is no evil as such, trying to scoff at the idea of evil existing in this day and age, because we have become too human, too horizontal to understand that there is an up and a down, and there is evil as such which serves a purpose in the world. Steiner gave some exercises to the people who wanted to follow his path, and among them there is the exercise of positivity, which is exemplified through a Persian story of the Christ and the apostles. Once, they stumble upon the corpse of a dog, and all the apostles react with disgust to it, while the Christ remarks how beautiful the teeth of the dead canine body are. This exercise is meant to train our thinking and emotions to see the positive within the negative. But the negative is still negative. So evil, despite its positive function of allowing growth within us, is still evil. Satan is still Satan, and this is one of its functions. There's no need to try to bend this one way or another like it is usually done among modernists and relativists. Evil has a purpose as such. If we say that evil doesn't exist in the sense that it's all relative, then we deny its purpose, and we return to the dull secularist view where there's no cosmic battle to be faced, because life is limited only to normal human affairs. We shall consider a seed and see that it only starts to grow once it is planted deep into the earth. Surrounded by darkness, it pushes its way out of it towards the light, and in the process realizes its inner potential, which is that of becoming a fully grown plant. It's this initial condition, this first obstacle, that allows the seed to establish its roots in the ground and grow in search of the light. This applies to us, to humans. We are seeds that need to be thrown into the darkness, to face the abyss in order to grow and realize our inner potential. That's why the satanic forces are at play. They are indeed evil, but evil has this positive purpose of putting before us an obstacle which demands from us the development of certain inner forces in order to overcome it. From a totally human moral perspective, the fact that God allowed such evil to exist in the world seems cruel in the first place. Atheists love to use this ethical issue against Christianity and God. They love to point out how imperfect the world is, how cruel, how disturbing it is for the modern human sensibility. Yet they don't ask the question, what is the purpose of evil? Why is there so much suffering? Modern philosophers like Slavoj Žižek like to remark how pointless suffering is, how in fact it doesn't bring about anything of value. Quote, "The most depressing lesson of suffering is that there is nothing to be learned from it," end quote. But exactly the contrary is true. If there is no suffering, no true wisdom and knowledge can grow organically within us, as suffering is a means of breaking up our preconceived notions to which we attach quite a lot of emotions. This emotional pain is necessary so that our thoughts can reorganize into a new and better representation of reality. Through suffering, we reach truth. By facing Satan, we become who we are meant to be. But in order for us to come to a worldview where these things become realities, we have to undergo certain changes in our perceptions and way of thinking. By default, we think that everything can be reduced to physicality. We interpret religion more and more through social, political, and historical lenses, and don't mention almost anything about the ontological and metaphysical aspect of it. This is how religious studies are set up in universities. If you listen to some professor in the field like Diana Pasulka, this is how it was designed to be. Teleology is viewed as completely fallacious. The question, is it true or not, is almost never asked. By default, the spiritual dimension is disregarded, and religion is treated just like another branch of sociology. If you don't see what is wrong with this approach, then you probably rely on the same secular and atheist assumptions of most people, especially in academia. And in doing so, you close yourself to certain realities that, whether you like it or not, are there, and they are even tangible if you are willing to do some experiments. It is quite silly to reduce the scientific method only to materialist means. One has to test everything with the tools that every single situation requires. Something like astral projection, for example, cannot be tested in the laboratory, but it requires special conditions, such as those of using one's own subjectivity and consciousness as an instrument to gain knowledge. And the cases are numerous and hard to dispute. The reductionist explanations try to ascribe the phenomenon only to some malfunction within the brain and nervous system. Yet the ontological dimension of the experience cannot be dismissed so easily. We won't get now into the details of why such explanations are unsatisfactory, as we have done so regarding mental experiences in other videos, of which logic is more or less the same. But the point is that beyond the physical lies another realm, which is populated by entities that can communicate with us in special conditions. Materialists run away from such a view because it terrifies them to discover that their assumptions about reality are incorrect, and that we are not as much as in control as we thought we were. The human experience as a whole is a lot stranger than the proponents of the current paradigm would like us to believe. Entities such as Satan thus can work behind the scenes without us even knowing about their existence and influence. Materialism is actually a direct result of this satanic influence, and the first step of waking up from the modern condition is to realize that what we call matter is just one aspect of reality, and beyond it there are forces which are invisible to us that operate continuously in our world. This brings us back to the classic issue in theology, the problem of evil. If God exists and He is the summum bonum, why does He allow such wicked entities to populate this and other realms? Why is there evil in the first place? Carl Gustav Jung tried to deal with this issue in Ion and Answer to Job. He criticized Saint Augustine's doctrine of Privatio boni, which actually has its origin in the Neoplatonist Plotinus, who identified evil with matter and nothingness. This doctrine seems quite convenient to safeguard the perfection of creation and the omnibenevolence of God in spite of all the suffering in human life. Jung points to the fact that before Augustine, the solution to this problem was quite different. He remarks that Clemens of Alexandria supported the idea that God governs the world with both his right and left hands. In this sense, Satan is just an extension of God, just another aspect of being. Jung could not accept that evil doesn't exist because he considered himself first and foremost an empiricist, and particularly an empiricist of the psyche, which proved to him over and over that evil is real and should be regarded as such. But there's a way in which, through metaphysics, we can see that St. Augustine is also right, and we can determine this by identifying goodness with being and evil with nothingness. God, who is pure being or the principle of being, is thus entirely good, and evil only appears to us as such because we do not identify it with that principle, and we trap ourselves in the relative world, which is so exactly because it is limited, it has boundaries, it is lacking, and this lacking is what evil is. The matter becomes extremely paradoxical because the nature of it is so, and also because we can look at the problem from different perspectives. Suffering feels quite real for us, and it is usually caused by a loss or lacking of some sort. This absence of being or realization of certain states of being is what brings pain to us. But at the same time, it's exactly what motivates us to achieve our goals. Satan, the adversary, is a very tangible function of reality which God clearly allows to operate by design because it's the only opportunity that humanity has to overcome itself. In the book of Job, Satan is given permission to destroy the life of the most pious man and to take away all that was dear to him. Job even gives in to nihilism and antinatalism when faced with such a loss. It's the absence of being in his life which caused the suffering. And this was all just a test, because at the end of the book, he regains even more than he previously had. Jung wrote about this story trying to psychoanalyze Yahweh, stating that Job had the moral upper ground in this situation because he had not done anything wrong. Yet God allowed Satan to do as he pleased with him, and then when asked for an explanation, Job received only a demonstration of God's might, without any moral justification for the decisions he took. First and foremost, instead of pointing the finger at Yahweh, one should consider that at least one of the lessons of this story is that reality doesn't conform to our sense of morality and justice. Another lesson is that the more advanced you are, the harsher the challenges you have to face. Satan didn't come to Yahweh to make a bet concerning the worst sinner among men, but precisely about the most pious among them. But if we want to delve into the matter from Jung's psychoanalytic perspective, we would have to make some further metaphysical clarifications. According to Jung, in answer to Job, God feels attacked by his most pious believer due to the latter's moral superiority. This is why when he intervenes, Yahweh can only reply with a demonstration of his own might, and not with an answer that makes sense within the normalcy of our moral sensibilities and sense of justice. Jung goes as far as to claim that the divine incarnation in the person of Jesus Christ served as a way for God to change his moral nature so that he could understand what the human condition entails. This view of God presupposes that he is an entity subject to change, and in a sense this can be so, but only if we make a distinction between the manifested and unmanifested God. In Hindu terms, between Brahman and Ishvara. The first is being itself, and not in a pantheistic sense, as we are talking about the principle of being, the center of the monad, which is equal to zero, completely transcendent, yet every aspect of reality is sustained by it, while the second could be viewed as the first emanation from the source. So when we are talking about Yahweh or Ishvara, we are dealing with a reflection of the first principle embodied in an entity and a personality with which we can interact and which can participate within the drama of existence. In order for God to have any role to play in his own creation, he has to put limits on himself by transitioning from pure being to just a being. In this way, the classical divine attributes of omniscience, omnipresence, omnipotence, and so on are functioning within certain limits to facilitate the divine participation within its own creation. That's why we can find so many contradictions within the Bible when it comes to Yahweh's behavior and his absolute power over existence itself, as Jung points out. In this sense, the manifested God can be fully implicated in the world, and be one of the poles towards which humanity has to gravitate in the cosmic battle between good and evil. A conflict in which it has to participate and face Satan to reach its fullest potential.